The end is upon you. I will pour out my fury and spend my anger against you. I will judge you according to your ways, and I will repay you for your abominations. I will not look on you with pity, and I will not spare you. I will repay you for your ways, and your abominations will be in your midst. Your doom is upon you. I will bring distress upon men, that they shall walk as the blind, because they have sinned against the Lord. I will pour out their blood as dust, and their entrails as refuse. The day that is coming, it will burn like a furnace. All the arrogant, every evildoer will be stubble. The day that is coming will set them on fire. Not a root or a branch will be left to them. Then I will trample on the wicked, that they should be ashes unto the souls of my fate. None of them will remain, none of their wealth, nothing of value. Those who survive will escape, each moaning for their own sins. Every hand will be feeble, and every knee will be weak. Horror will cover them, shame will be on every face. I will turn my face away from these people. I will prepare chains, for the land is full of bloodshed, and the city is full of violence. Destruction will come. Calamity upon calamity will come, and they will seek peace. But there will be none. The hands of the people will tremble, and I will do to them according to their way. And by their own standards, I shall judge them. Then they will know it was the Lord who sent me.
Over the years, we've gotten some pretty absurd Warframes to play with, and we've also been granted access to systems and resources that have completely sundered the landscape in the residue of power creep and its consequences. Any weapon can be remedied, and any frame can be made viable. The sheer scale and flexibility of the sandbox DE has crafted over the years should be celebrated and held in high regard. From this playground of infinite damage scaling and absurd potential, you'd think that players would be encouraged to find what they like without fear of persecution or ridicule. And to some degree, that is exactly what's happened. However, what tends to happen more often than not is people prefer to drift into the seductive influence of the meta. Rather than finding weapons that are underused or taking the time to find something that is special to the player, people flock to guides and videos that tell them what to play for the most damage possible. There isn't anything inherently wrong with this, at least for the most part, but it can ultimately result in many of our weapons or warframes that were designed and crafted with care to go unused and underappreciated. On a smaller scale, it can potentially foster a very small community of players who are too focused on what is optimal to the point where they exclude others from playing with them, or in the worst of cases, deem it appropriate to cast judgment on others depending on what they might choose to use, on top of calling anything not up to the current meta standard trash. Harrow is not the best support frame, he is not the best crowd controller, and he is not the best weapon platform. And he doesn't have to be. All Harrow needs to be is good in these categories. Because when a frame has good sustainability, good crowd control, and good weapon integration, they become excellent. Harrow's kit is focused on sustaining himself and making weapons more capable. In doing this, his teammates will stand to benefit from his supportive traits. In my eyes, Harrow is a precision marksman who has a deep appreciation for each weapon, whether they be widely used or forgotten. He recognizes and understands the craftsmanship and beauty of each, and grants each forgotten firearm the means to redeem themselves. Harrow knows very well that many weapons don't necessarily need benefits from things like damage vulnerability, elemental buffs, double dipping, fucking triple dipping, damage multipliers out the ass, or critical damage multiplication to perform at a competent level. Sometimes, maybe even many times, all the weapon needs is a faster pair of hands, a bit of oil to their bolt carriers, some heavy springs, a generous helping of critical chance, and an opportunity to put the rounds where it matters.
The head.
Harrow possesses an excellent kit of 4 incredibly capable abilities that naturally complement and play into each other. Each works in tandem to establish a ritualistic and disciplined playstyle that not only mirrors the thematic traits of Harrow himself, but also rewards the player with nearly limitless energy, health, and shields, all of that being topped off with accelerated weapon proficiency. To play Harrow is to root yourself around the cyclical nature of his abilities, and so long as you commit and don't falter this ritual too frequently, you won't fail. To break or ignore this ritual is not an immediate death sentence, as Harrow's doctrine is not one that is unwilling to extend a hand of forgiveness to those who truly wish to prove themselves, but actively working against it will ultimately lead to your downfall. On his own, Harrow is easily one of the most capable solo frames in the game, but when it comes to playing with others in a squad, it can become a bit more challenging to find his footing. But it isn't impossible. This is because in order for Harrow to distribute the harvest of his abilities, he must be the one getting kills. When there are frames that are tailor-made to obliterate rooms down to their individual atoms, this can prove to be somewhat of a challenge for him. However, I think that Harrow's influence on a public match can be compared to that of an invisible hand, which fits well with this theme of religious devotion and ties to divinity. Others may not recognize that it's there. They may never stop to question where these bursts of 200 energy are coming from, or why their health doesn't get a chance to drop below half. That certainly doesn't mean he's not helping. They're just unaware of his influence. Because of the way his abilities work, Harrow does not need to dominate to provide a meaningful support. But that doesn't say anything about how much fun you might lose out on in these cases. But regardless, so long as he has weapons that can kill the occasional enemy, he can provide value. In fact, he even has an augment that functions to mitigate some of his selfish tendencies and allows for his teammates to trigger the benefits of his abilities, making it easier to provide value. I'll still elaborate on the logistics of Harrow's team player viability as we continue on, but it's still worth spending breath on out of the gate that while Harrow can definitely function in a team setting, you will likely find that it is easier to learn his kit and feel the flow of his abilities in a solo environment. I really recommend picking Harrow up from week 9 of the circuit. It's less troublesome, it has no RNG, and you get some extra gear including his 4th ability augment, which is excellent. If you don't have access to the Deviri circuit, getting Harrow will put you through a respectable grind. His blueprint and chassis are simple enough to get, the former being granted as a reward for completing the Chains of Harrow quest. However, if you threw his blueprint away for whatever reason, you'll have to gain 50,000 standing of Cephalon Samaris to buy it back from him, and getting Samaris standing is a royal pain in the ass. The latter, his chassis blueprint, is rewarded as a drop from corrupted enemies in Void Fissure missions, dropping at around 3% per corrupted enemy, which sounds bad, but at the rates we kill at, it isn't that bad at all. Chances are, if you played the game for a meaningful amount of time, you already have a blueprint for it. Now, the Neuroptics blueprint comes from 2 places. The first being the Kuva Fortress Survival mission, which drops on Rotation C every 20 minutes at a 12% rate. The second source is from the Kuva Fortress Spy mission as a Rotation A reward for successfully hacking 1 terminal, and that drops at around 16.67%. Now, the Systems blueprint. You'll be able to grab them from the Kuva Survival mission, where they have a 12% chance to drop on Rotation C, so the same place as the Neuroptics, just at a slightly worse drop chance. There is another drop source for the Systems, but I'm hesitant to even tell you where it is because it's so abysmal. Jumping in here to save you some time, I had previously scripted out the drop chances for all the defection missions. Instead, I'm going to flash them on screen here, because I do not believe that mission is worth wasting breath on, and you should just do the survival mission. If you really care, here's everything you need to know, but again, I really think you should just skip it. My apologies for the interruption. Getting Harrow Prime is just a question of running relics. As of writing, Harrow is currently vaulted, so he is not attainable through normal means. You can still trade for his relics and run them in squads, but of course it's always easier to run relics in a group to ensure your success in hunting for the parts you need. Since relics are always shifting and changing, I will leave a link in the description to the Harrow Prime wiki page so you can see the relics you need to get them yourself. As for Harrow's base stats, he possesses 270 health, scaling to 370 at rank 30, 445 shields, scaling to 555 at rank 30. He carries 185 armor, granting 38% damage reduction on damage to health. He has 100 energy, scaling to 150 at rank 30. That's quite low. He has a sprint speed value of 1. He comes with a dash polarity in the aura slot, and he comes with a D and a dash polarity. His Lich progenitor element is magnetic, and the subsumed ability he gives is Condemn. And the Railjack ability he provides, yeah, we're going deep, is Covenant. For Harrow Prime, he only possesses a higher shield rating of 640, scaling to 740 at rank 30. This cements him at 6th place from max base shields of all frames. He has a higher energy capacity of 140, scaling to 190 at rank 30. And he comes with an additional V polarity alongside the default D and dash polarities his base model possesses. Harrow Prime's additional shield and energy values are sensible improvements. Having additional shields benefits his passive and plays well with his second ability. The reason for this is because it uses your shield count to scale its duration, and having more shields means when you're undamaged you have higher base duration, so the Prime having more shields is, in a way, a direct buff to his second ability. In addition to that, base Harrow already had an above average shield rating, meaning Harrow Prime has top tier shield levels. There is a weakness that comes from this though, as it may come back to bite him in terms of fully regaining all of his shields to reset the shield gate, unless you have Guardian equipped on a Sentinel, or manage to chain a sufficient amount of enemies to totally refill the gauge, or have some other means of regaining all shields reliably. Hey, just a little warning. If you do intend to run Guardian on a Sentinel, be aware that any mods that convert spent energy to shields, like Augur mods or Brief Respite, will prevent you from breaking your shields, which in turn prevents Guardian's activation conditions from being met. So be aware of that before you commit to either solution, and be sure not to mix them. It's worth noting that making use of Harrow's shield capacity and running a full redirection will allow most Beast Companions to make use of the Reinforced Bond mod, so long as you have linked redirection. This plays well with Harrow's Penance ability, granting an additional 60% additive fire rate to your weapons. Not the biggest deal, but it's reliable, it's an open option, and not everyone will think of it right off the bat, so use it if you'd like. Now, his energy max is more or less below the general average, as after averaging all the scaled energy rates of all the frames, including primes, it's revealed that the current general average of max energy capacity is 214.58 points of energy. This is all the frames up to Protea Prime. All frames released afterward have not been accounted for. Base Harrow's rank 30 max of 150 and Harrow Prime's rank 30 of 190 are listed at the lower end of the ratings, with base Harrow at the very bottom at 13th place, among the frames that possess the least amount of maxed energy a frame can have at rank 30. Don't let this dissuade you, because the efficacy of his third ability, paired with Primed Flow, or Archon Flow, will still leave you with more energy than you'll know what to do with. Speaking on his third ability, it's probably the exact reason he's been granted a below average energy rating, simply due to the ludicrous amounts of energy it can generate without much in the way of effort. If you get used to running the base model with any energy increase at all, the energy increase on the Prime can almost feel superfluous, especially with a Primed Flow. With Harrow's energy support being as strong as it isn't at all out of the question to run a negative efficiency build using Blind Rage. Ultimately, this means that just like other frames compared to their primes, there isn't a huge amount of meaningful difference. There is one thing Harrow struggles with innately, to the point where I would consider putting it in the base stats segment of this video, and that is his ability casting speed. I very much encourage anyone who finds themselves maining Harrow, or even keeping him in your top 5 list of frames, to seriously consider leaving mod space for natural talent. Or even better, if you have the helmet section unlocked, saving at least one slot for a Talforged casting speed shard. As for me, I've given Harrow 2 Talforged casting speed shards for 75% casting speed. I have only recently made this second shard a Talforged. Before, it was 1 Tal and 1 regular casting speed shard, and that was already more than excellent. You can easily make these whatever else you like, and it won't really make that much of a difference, since Harrow doesn't really need any one stat to be pushed to crazy levels to perform well. He's super flexible in what you can put on him, and you can do really anything. It's all up to you. I think Harrow's passive should be seen as a standard for what a good passive ability should look like, without being busted. Or maybe more accurately, one of Harrow's passives should be seen that way. Harrow actually has 2 passives, and one of them is so strong that it probably shouldn't be the standard that all other frame passives should be measured up to. I'll start with the one that's just all around good. Harrow starts every single mission with a full energy bar. What an excellent passive. There have been so many times where the first thing I do in any given mission is plant an energy restore down and wait for a few seconds for it to give me a sufficient supply of starting energy to get my momentum going. Not with Harrow. The first thing Harrow should do in a mission is start channeling his third ability, so the first kill he gets can fully restore any energy lost. In reality, it's a small quality of life improvement, but it feels so massive. Mind you that this applies on missions like Sanctuary Onslaught, as well as on revives, so you'll always reset and revive with a full bar of energy, allowing you to quickly charge your Thurible in the time that you're immune, to get some more energy to cast your 4, to re-establish your crit chance bonus, gain more shields, activate Penance, and recover the shields you just spent again. I cannot overstate how nice it feels when it matters. Energy is a large part of what makes a Warframe flow, and generally, a Warframe has to build up their energy to start that momentum, and Harrow just skips that part. Harrow's second passive is much more present in game and has a much bigger role to play, and does influence his performance in game, even compared to other frames. Harrow has double max overshield capacity. To illustrate exactly what that means, every Warframe can gain a maximum of 1200 overshields on top of their maximum shield value in mission, meaning this additional increase is applied after mods. Harrow can gain a maximum of 2400 overshields. That's massive. Access to this increased capacity isn't exclusively bound to methods available only to Harrow. You're able to reach this elevated maximum from all sources that would usually grant additional shields, be it consumables, weapon passives, or other Warframe abilities.
Subusumes unto Gruges do Rutger mi du a yogi u kakdruti Creduger Sager tu tugrang an tugranir mi uveg du enemus u am hegdes un Cleuger anunst.
Harrow lashes his sensor forward, a spectral twin sloughing away from its form, lurching forward through space to those Harrow sees fit to damn, its influence increasing in width and height as it travels. All adversaries in its wake are laced in the lacerating chains that bound Harrow in his stance against the cruel, mocking eye of the indifference. Each enemy unfortunate enough to be exposed to the snare will not only bolster Harrow's shields, but will also have their arms pulled open and their heads held high, allowing Harrow to look his enemies in the eye as he embraces them with the mercy of a swift death.
Expel 25 energy to cast Condemn, throwing a Spectre of Harrow sensor forward, traveling 20 meters with the width of 2.5 meters that gradually increases in width and height as it travels, covering a wide conical area. As Condemn rolls forward, its chains will halt any enemy it passes unless they have Overguard. Anyone who is chained will return a base of 150 shields to Harrow and be rooted in place, posed open to headshots for 6 seconds. Shooting enemies caught in Condemn will cause them to twitch in pain, but the movement isn't bad enough to interfere with placing said headshots. Should you cast Condemn on enemies that have already been chained from a previous cast, there will be no shield return and the duration will not be refreshed. So unless there are enemies beyond the crowd you just locked down that you missed, or didn't get everyone in a group, I do not advise casting more than once per group of enemies. There are units in the game that resist chains of Condemn by either not being chained for the full duration, with following casts lasting shorter and shorter amounts of time, or thrashing around making it difficult to land headshots. The notable units who exhibit this behavior respectively are the Rogue Necromechs and the Hollow Vein found in the Intrati Labs on Deimos. If you cast Condemn on enemies in the middle of being pulled by an ability, such as Cordon or Magus Anomaly, they will stop moving the moment they are chained.
Hi, coming in from post to make a little correction. Enough time has passed since gathering that information that it is now changed. Before, when Cordon would pull enemies, Condemn would halt them in their place, and Cordon was just not able to pull enemies that were captured by Condemn. Magus Anomaly was kind of nebulous and was kind of hard to keep track of in terms of how it worked. But as of November 29th, and I assume the Kome update, this has changed,
and now Cordon and Magus Anomaly are able to pull condemned enemies. I'm not sure if there are some pulls that will or won't work on condemned enemies, and I don't know if this is intentional or not, but this does make things a lot more consistent, so for now we're going to ride with it. Attempting to chain enemies with Overguard will, again, not return shields, and they will not yield to the CC. So you must break Overguard before you can use Condemn on an Exos unit, or any other special unit that may possess it. The same logic applies to enemies who are affected by the lifted status. It's important to note that Acolytes are not considered special to Condemn, and they will be successfully halted in place, making Condemn incredibly handy for locking them down the moment they arrive. Condemn makes catalyzing shields a decent consideration on Harrow if you're partial to using the old-fashioned shield gate, as at just 100% strength, Harrow gains 150 shields per enemy hit, and catalyzing shields sets his base shield count to 111, and his prime shield count to 148. Meaning, successfully chaining just a single enemy with Condemn will instantly refresh the 1.33 second shield gate given by catalyzing shields. That may sound attractive to some of you, but it's important to keep in mind that running low shields on Harrow will impact his second ability in at least two ways. The first fault in low shields on Harrow reveals itself when we learn that modding for a lower shield bank will cause the initial heal his second ability Penance gives to be less helpful, as the percentage of the heal is based on the amount of shield sacrificed. In other words, the fewer shields you have, the less Penance will heal you when you cast it. The second fault appears when we learn that the biggest driver for duration scaling on Penance comes from the quantity of shields Harrow has when casting Penance. With catalyzing shields active, getting the full 120 second duration out of Penance will require multiple casts of fully overshielded bars, and the amount of effort it would take to feel like you're doing a good job of upkeeping it would just be too much. Or at least it would be for me. Whether or not this is something you're interested in compromising for a reliable shield gate is up to you. Condemn can be cast repeatedly, over and over, as long as the animation completes, so you could feasibly have multiple waves locking enemies down and returning shields to you from multiple directions, which immediately adds points to the versatility and reliability offered by Condemn. The direction of Condemn's travel is dictated by the direction the camera is facing. When Harrow is standing still, he will snap to face the direction of the camera before the animation plays out. If you choose to cast it while on the move, you can keep sprinting forward and cast Condemn while the camera is facing a different direction, and the result of this will have the wave travel in a different direction than your own, which further contributes to the flexibility of Condemn. Since casting this ability is a single-handed action, it will not interrupt Harrow when sprinting, jumping, bullet jumping, pulling a bowstring back, firing, or reloading, even though Condemn's cast animation completely overrides the reload animations for its duration. It's practically always available, and will not cause any hindrance to Harrow, save for the slow casting speed. Casting Condemn in the air adds some amount of complexity, at least in the realms of how it affects the travel of the sensor, and what casting Condemn can do to Harrow while he's airborne. When casting in the air, one of three things can happen. The first is if you cast Condemn while you're idle in the air without any parkour animations active, especially bullet jump or aim gliding animations, Harrow will quickly fall to the ground at a forward angle to cast with his feet on the ground, not dissimilar to what happens to Nidus when he casts Virulence in the air. The second is if Harrow casts Condemn while he's in the middle of performing any acrobatic animation, be it an aim glide, a jump, or a bullet jump animation, he will remain airborne and the wave will cast from the point that Harrow is directly above. And the third is if Harrow is above 10 meters or so, he will travel down to the ground to cast Condemn, regardless if you're aim gliding. This seems to suggest that there is a height check on cast where above a certain threshold, again, it seems to be at around 10 meters, Harrow will be brought to the ground regardless. The only way to have this not happen is to cast Condemn during the bullet jump animation. However, if you are above the threshold and cast before the animation is complete, casting Condemn will only play the cast animation, but the sensor itself will not launch and nothing will happen, and you'll still expend energy. Repeatedly pressing the ability key when this happens will give you the ability in use error, despite the lack of any apparent action from Harrow. Before you start getting too anxious over it, I'll say you shouldn't really worry about this too much, as I've never felt limited by the height at which I could cast Condemn in ordinary gameplay, no matter how intense the situation was. And the exact details of this behavior, specifically the height threshold, only came to my attention as I was repeatedly testing the limits in the sim, and it has never once caused me an issue in-game, or at least not that I've noticed. If you play Harrow for a while, it won't be too long before you get a feel for the casting parameters of this ability as you experiment and play with it. But beyond these details, there isn't much else worth considering, at least not that I'm able to think of. Condemn has a very generous 20-meter range at base with a 2.5 meter width, which increases in its width and height as it progresses forward. It isn't inaccurate to suggest that this qualifies as a conical ability, since it's capable of covering a good bit of verticality as well. The degree to which all these dimensions increase scales off of power range. Curiously, Condemn is even capable of snaring people directly behind and around Harrow when cast, but the distance directly behind him is locked at a strict 5 meters, regardless of any range increases you may have installed. Going into negative range with a max narrow-minded at 34% is able to snare corpus drones hovering at around 3 meters at the tail end of travel, but I could not reach Tusk Grineer drones at 5 meters. With Augur Reach giving 130% range, it didn't reliably reach high enough to hit all the drones unless it was at the tail end of his travel. It is somewhat difficult to measure though, as it seems that even grazing an enemy with the very edge of the wave will register a hit, so width estimations can be somewhat overestimated. I generally choose to run my Harrow with at least a stretch equipped, and I really don't like to compromise on that 145% range. This amount seems to be the sweet spot that only costs a single mod slot and remains capable of capturing pretty much every airborne enemy I've come across. It's worth noting that even with the generous ranges CONDEMN can cover with 145% range, there are reasons to consider modding for more range by adding something like Augur Reach. It isn't exclusively for the additional coverage, but also because the sensor and its wave both get a notable increase to travel speed and active duration, meaning it lasts longer, as the range value increases, which can make CONDEMN feel more snappy or immediate, as it takes less time to reach groups of enemies or travel through them. When it comes to how CONDEMN interacts with obstacles and walls as it travels, in a majority of cases it seems obstacles are pretty much a non-factor, as CONDEMN reliably travels through doors or other built-in obstacles such as stationary assets, pillars, or walls within the same tile. As far as I'm capable of measuring, the general rule for casting through walls can be boiled down to as long as the line of travel doesn't intersect with an area that would lead to a fall out of bounds, it should travel through safely. To be more objective, if you walk up to a wall that doesn't have a tile behind it, the sensor will travel until it hits the point where there is no floor, where it will then be cancelled as it more or less falls off the map. You'll know it failed if you hear an abrupt stop to the droning sound it makes while traveling. Generally though, it will go through pretty much anything. It's just the line it will travel that you might find yourself considering once every 4,263 casts of the ability. It's good to keep in mind that CONDEMN will always seek to stay near the ground it flows over, and will mimic the changes in topology as it travels. I think this is what causes it to falter when the ground between Harrow and its targets is broken by geometry that would trigger a respawn for the player, or lead to an area where it falls off the map. When faced with vertical walls, it generally has no problem falling down to a lower level, but it does not like climbing to reach higher levels. But it has zero issue with slopes or stairs. Overall, CONDEMN is probably among the best crowd control support abilities available, at least in my opinion. On top of stopping enemies in their tracks for a very healthy base of 6 seconds, it opens enemies up to very easy headshots, and 150 shields per enemy caught at base is nothing to sneeze at all. Scaling strength makes it trivial to get a couple hundred shields per enemy, which I shouldn't have to explain to you why that's good. And given this is his subsumable ability, it's one of the most underrated choices, again, in my opinion. To provide an example, a friend of mine, the only one dead, used CONDEMN on Banshee on top of a bunch of other survivability mods to make her far more than comfortable in Steel Path Circulus, the conjunction survival mission. Banshee, who's known to be one of the most fragile frames in the game, being made to function more than fine on the highest level survival mission on Steel Path, in part due to CONDEMN, should be more than enough of an endorsement for its utility. There is an augment available for this ability in the form of Tribunal, but it'll be best to cover the other abilities first as it directly interfaces with their functions. This does unfortunately mean that the augment can serve no purpose when using CONDEMN on other frames, as of course they have no access to Harrow's other abilities, similar to Hildren's Blazing Pillage augment requiring Hildren's Haven ability to function, or Grendel's Hardy Nourishment augment requiring an enemy to be in Grendel's stomach to trigger its benefit.
But he was pierced for our rebellion, crushed for our sins. He was beaten so we could be whole. He was whipped so we could be healed. For though he wounds, he also bandages. He strikes, but his hands also heal.
Without a moment's hesitation, Harrow strips the protection of his shields away with 2 shattering strikes to his back from the weight of his sensor, fearlessly embracing any pain or injury that may befall him, demonstrating the unshakable resolve of his faith to friend and foe alike. Despite compromising himself in the face of his adversaries, Harrow does not fall to their assault. Instead, to their horror, he is only invigorated with increased dexterity and rejuvenation through righteous violence, thriving and undying under the blessing bestowed by the unseen, bringing his brethren up with him, a reward and gift for their beloved seer.
Harrow consumes 50 energy to deplete the entirety of his shield bank with 2 strikes to his back from his sensor. In the depletion of his shields, Harrow is rewarded with the immediate repair to any wounds he is currently afflicted with, given accelerated dexterity and speed in the use and cycling of his weapons, and is gifted the ability to convert the wrath dispensed by his hands into rejuvenation for him and his allies. The amount Harrow is healed and the duration of the blessings imparted by the Formless are dependent on the amount of shields Harrow sacrifices, with these values being affected by strength and duration. Casting Penance does require you to have the energy to spend, like any other ability, but it also requires you have at least some shields. If your shields are depleted, you will be unable to cast. The casting animation will interrupt your movement or other actions like reloading or firing. The best way I found to counter this is by casting it while aim gliding, as that helps you preserve your momentum. And like I suggested while talking about his base stats, I really recommend running any form of casting speed, be it through shards or natural talent. I'm sure some of you have been wondering why I've been glossing over the fact that Harrow must sacrifice the entirety of his shield count like it isn't that big of a deal, when, in your eyes, it may be way too much of a sacrifice and completely turn you off from using it. To those of you who are legitimately worried, don't be. There's a few tricks available to Harrow that either mitigate the breaking of his shield gate, or just cause him to be completely immune to damage for a short period of time, so it doesn't have to be as risky as you might initially think. The first option at our disposal is to cast Condemn into some enemies immediately before casting Penance, as the shields you gain from chaining enemies down are not counted for Penance's attacks, as Penance is only concerned about the amount of shields you have when activating the ability. Be sure to time this so when you cast Penance, Condemn still has enemies to snag. Even if you don't get too many shields from casting Condemn, it's still enough of an offset to reduce the load of Penance's attacks, as even the shields from a single enemy will be enough to preserve your full shield gate, which should be enough to successfully ensure that you're not as vulnerable as you would be otherwise. Our second option is to bring a Sentinel equipped with Guardian. Cast Penance at any shield level, and watch as your shields are instantly regenerated back to their full modded capacity. Doing this has made me really appreciate my Sentinels, and it's basically 100% consistent because I usually get my shields totally maxed out before casting for that 2-minute uptime, and by the time I need to cast Penance again, my Sentinel is ready to instantly refill my shields again. By the way, if you want your Sentinel to prioritize Guardian over anything else, be sure to put the Guardian mod in the top left corner, because for Sentinels, the order of the precepts they have actually does matter, and it'll read the order of the precept mods from top left to bottom right. Our third option for preserving our shield gate is by having a single Augur mod installed somewhere in your kit, either on a weapon or Harrow himself. Penance will only consider the shield count value before the Augur set adds the additional shields from converting the energy cost. This will reliably leave you with 20 to 30 shields depending on your efficiency, but the important bit is that you keep your shield gate. The only time this will not work is if you cast Penance with a fully maxed out shield capacity, because casting when full leaves the Augur mod bonus unable to add any additional shields on top of a maxed value, so Penance will simply consume the entire bar and nothing will remain. That might sound a little scary, but so long as you're casting Penance in active situations where enemies are firing at you, you'll probably always be a few points short of full, so it may be more reliable than you think. Our fourth option isn't anything mind-blowing, just utilize Rolling Guard. Simply roll before casting Penance, and it'll ensure you have a safe little window to cast Condemn afterwards. This is a nice little insurance policy, but it's probably more redundant outside of levels under 1,000 plus in Steel Path, because it's usually better to just cast Condemn before casting Penance than it is to install a mod that gives you time to cast Condemn after Penance. It can be easy to forget, but Warframe is a game where sometimes all you need is a change to your habits or execution, and sometimes these small little changes will produce a great enough difference to effectively open up a mod slot for something else. And the fifth and final option for us involves his fourth ability, Covenant, and using the period of invulnerability to safely cast Penance. Honestly, you might as well just use this to refresh THURIBLE and Condemn as well, but we'll go into more detail when we actually start talking about Covenant. Hi, I lied. There is one last option I want to talk about, and it's provided to us in the form of Fast Deflection. Shield recharge delay and recharge rate are often overlooked stats, but Fast Deflection can allow our shields to begin recharging in between the time it takes for the second impact of the sensor to land after the first. And just like the Augur set, it gives us just a few extra shields to work with, keeping our shield gate intact. Now, while this is a cool option that did surprise me when I tested it, it can only function when Harrow is working with a base casting speed. And I think having faster casts on Harrow is more important than something like Fast Deflection or the Augur set keeping a few extra points for your shield gate, especially when casting Condemn can do the same job, but it's interesting regardless. So keep all these options in mind and toss them around, weigh them out, and figure out which ones you want, and hopefully that'll put all your apprehensions to rest. Now, as for the actual function of the ability, the increase in fire rate, attack speed, and reload makes Penance an absolute joy to use. It isn't difficult to get it rolling or maintain with its duration feeding off of Harrow's shield count and cast, because with CONDEMN, Harrow has no problem whatsoever collecting massive amounts of shields. It keeps you and your allies topped off on health without really demanding any of your mental energy. And the buffs it provides massively impact the feel of the weapons you use for the better. The base stats are fairly generous and scale nicely with strength mods, allowing you to reach some pretty absurd levels of speed with your weaponry, and let's not forget that 5% lifesteal isn't already more than enough with all the damage we're capable of, despite it scaling off of strength anyway. Something I think more people should appreciate about Penance and what it has to offer is that it isn't your standard damage go up buff, even though it does make your damage go up because that's what happens when you make the damage go out faster. Instead of being used for bigger numbers, it's used to make things feel better, which I feel like is often prioritized under damage bonuses, be it in modding or buffing abilities. And honestly, it's a damn shame, because you can have a weapon that delivers numbers on an 8 or 9-digit platter, but if it's slow to fire or just has awful handling, you're just not going to use it very much. With Penance streamlining the way Harrow handles the weapons he uses, you not only feel better because of the smoother operation of the weapons, you also feel good because you're playing the role of a disciplined holy man who has far more precision and dexterity when wielding weapons than anyone would expect. After playing the game for so long, I feel the need to remind you that there is value in appreciating things like feel and themes in Warframe, because it's not always about getting the biggest numbers possible. If get big number is the only thing you chase after in this game, it can sacrifice the nicer things that appeal to us on individual levels. Now to talk about the healing aspects of Penance. The initial heal stat is directly connected to the amount of shields Harrow has on cast. At base, 50% of the shield pool consumed when Penance is cast will be converted into health. This 50% is scaled with power strength, so generally you're going to have a full, if not close to full, bar of health if you forget to use one of the shield break mitigation strategies. Then, when the buff is actually activated, everything in your kit, not including companion damage, now has lifesteal on it. You'll see the effect of this while Penance is active as the reticle changes form, and you get a readout that accompanies this stylized reticle for a bit of time, showing how much you're healing when you deal damage and have health missing. When the damage you deal is converted into health, you'll see a glow come from the reticle that mimics your chosen energy colors. The glow itself isn't too bad or distracting, but if you have your VFX slider set to a particularly high setting, you'll probably find yourself noticing it when you're focused on playing, which is just a nice way to say it's pretty in your face. The lifesteal granted to your weapons from Penance is delivered to everyone in affinity range, which is 50 meters. Modding for range will not change this value, but its range can be boosted by using tools that increase affinity range. Specifically, this is Vazarin's Mending Unity passive, which adds 25 meters on top of the 50 meter affinity range, resulting in a 75 meter radius. And you can push this even further with Phosphors from Cetus, the red and blue both adding 200 meters. I've heard conflicting information on whether or not the red and blue Phosphors stack, but if they do, you can get up to possibly 400 meters of Penance's range. If not, you'll just have another 200. Realistically, I don't see anyone really ever doing that, since it's a duration-based consumable buff, and frankly, 50 meters is already really good. But I'm here to inform you that it is at least an option. The nice thing about Penance operating off of lifesteal is that you don't have to really compete head-to-head with your teammates to get kills in order to heal them. Doing damage is all that matters. This results in you still providing some good support value as long as you can at least get one big hit off every so often. Honestly, it doesn't even need to be that big of a hit. If you have decent damage, it'll still be more than enough to get everyone up to full. Additionally, the heal isn't limited to other teammates. It applies to all friendly forces, be it companions, rescue targets, specters, defensive targets. However, defensive objectives are only permitted to regain 50 health per second when in range of Harrow, and I'm not certain if that's altered by strength, but I'd wager a guess that it probably isn't. As much as I'd love to get to the conclusion where I tell you, yes, it's a good ability, I do need to talk about the dynamic between Penance and conditional strength buffs. I'll be using Archon Intensify as one of the primary examples, since Harrow does heal with abilities. The conditions for Archon Intensify's duration-based strength increase are met by both the direct heal from casting Penance itself, as well as from the lifesteal on your weapons. so long as you either heal yourself, your companion, or your teammates. However, the conditional won't apply to the cast that healed you. It'll only become available for the next cast you make. I often run a few conditional strength buffs, primarily Molt Augmented Growing Power and the Parazon's Power Drain mod. All of Harrow's abilities do make use of these buffs, however, Penance, the ability that I would argue gets the most benefit from a strength buff, has a problem. The problem is, as of writing, recasting Penance while it is currently active will not apply any conditional strength buff you have available. As it is now, recasting only serves to extend the duration of the first cast you made, meaning the strength rating you had on the first cast is preserved. What's worse is, if you have a conditional strength buff that is only applied to your next cast, as an example, from an arcane such as Molt Vigor or Power Ramp, it will be consumed when casting Penance while providing you with 0 change. To reiterate, this only occurs when Penance is recast before the duration on the previous cast is finished. Additional strength from conditionals will not apply unless you are casting a fresh instance of Penance without it being active already. This means that yes, conditionals can benefit Penance, but in mission you have to go out of your way to ensure they take place. Now, the nice thing about this is if you can manage to get the conditional buff you want on Penance, you can realistically keep it up for as long as you can manage to keep Penance going. If you want my opinion, committing the mod space for Archon Intensify in particular just does not make sense on Harrow. His other abilities do benefit, but only marginally, and Penance wants that buff the most. Now, if you run Combat Discipline, which is honestly not a bad choice for Harrow, especially with Arcane Avenger, each kill you get with Penance can trigger Archon Intensify, at least when the buff period runs out, because you cannot refresh the strength buff duration of 10 seconds. This does work out decently for Harrow's other abilities, even if the additional 30% increase isn't that monumental. And so long as you watch the remaining time on Penance, ensure you activate the buff on a kill within the last few seconds, you will get a small window of opportunity to make use of for the conditional on Archon Intensify for Penance. If you don't run Combat Discipline, it becomes a lot more difficult to make use of, since in a majority of content, you won't really be taking damage. You'll have to use a companion to heal or hope your allies aren't as resistant as you, actively making the conditional harder to trigger reliably, which ultimately results in Archon Intensify being a wasteful mod to install. It just ends up feeling unfortunate that Penance, the only ability that can trigger Archon Intensify, and the main ability that you would seek to get a conditional strength benefit for, currently works in a way that actively prevents the application of conditional strength buffs, unless the ability, which has a max uptime of 2 minutes, need I remind you, is not currently active. Want to know the best part? Harrow doesn't even need that much strength anyway. If you want more strength, use Blind Rage and Molt Augmented. You're fine. Molt Augmented works because once you kill 250 enemies, you just have the additional 60% strength. And it doesn't require you to time Penance within some tight window to get a small bonus conditional strength buff. It's just there, so eventually you'll run out and you'll just cast it, and you'll just get it without thinking about it. On top of that, your other abilities are always benefiting from that extra 60%, and it's always there unless you die and respawn. Growing Power just works because it might as well be another 24% strength, because the condition of triggering on status effect application, like, that's the easiest shit ever. There's hardly ever a time where we're not doing that. The only one you could really argue against is Power Drain on my Parazon, but honestly, what else am I gonna put on it? If I pay attention just once, that's another 50% for Penance, as long as I'm paying attention to keeping it up. And that condition doesn't have a timer either. It's just on the next ability cast. So if I go out of my way to apply it, I'm generally pretty confident I can, even if it's the condition that can be harder to meet in harder gameplay. Overall, you just need to be aware of what the issue is if you're used to running and relying on conditional strength bonuses. Originally, I thought Archon Intensify just didn't work, but I'm happier to know it can, even if it is at the cost of a pretty annoying caveat. I'm of the opinion that Penance is among the list of better abilities in the game. It's offering so much for so long for a cost that is not hard to pay or recover, impacting one of the most important and often underappreciated aspects of shooter games, which is weapon feel. It is absolutely one of Harrow's priorities to keep Penance active at all times. There is no reason you wouldn't want to use it unless you're running a weapon that heavily relies on mods like Hemorrhage or Internal Bleeding to function as you like. But even then, Harrow can probably help you get results out of those weapons without those mods. And to wrap that all up, it keeps your health, your companion's health, your teammates' and your teammates' companion's health all in peak condition. Honestly, if you get too used to having this ability active, you might find yourself feeling like other frames make weapons feel too slow or cumbersome, so be careful that you don't let it spoil you too much. With all of that being said, I feel it's important to take a bit to address the somewhat common opinion of Harrow supportive traits being useless in squads, by pointing out the fact that while yes, it is absolutely true that Harrow does have to work harder in public missions, and subsequently does feel worse to play in squads if you can't compete at least a little bit with your teammates' kill rates, Penance does not require Harrow to kill anyone to provide his team with substantial amounts of health. All Harrow has to do is deal damage. That is not a hard roadblock to contend with, at least when compared to competing for kills. Even if you can get your hands on just one enemy, all of our weapons deal so much damage that even the ability's base of 5% lifesteal would be far more than enough to fully heal a beefy frame like Grendel, with even a mid-game level of investment on a weapon. And with additional power strength, it only becomes easier. When we are capable of casually dealing damage in the hundreds of thousands, and even in the millions, 5% is nothing to scoff at. If you still want to call that useless, I don't have much else to say to you. Not ideal or overshadowed by other supportive abilities? Totally agree. But useless?
You're out of your fucking mind.
If I was to add one thing to this ability, I'd want them to give Penance a little bit of recoil suppression. Not affected by strength, just a set 80 or 90% or something like that. The reason? For feel. I find that removing 100% of recoil negatively affects some of the enjoyment I feel on my weapons, to the point where I keep different stabilizer mods all at different ranks, so I can fine-tune the feel of a weapon when using Deadhead. I find that the recoil aspect is so valuable to me that I don't even use weapons like the Convectrix, even though it's one of the most disgusting bleed weapons to ever exist. It just has no kick. It has no impact. Not in the damage type sense, but in the feedback sense. And to me, that makes it feel so bland. Of course, that's just me though. Penance honestly doesn't really need anything. It's already a borderline perfect ability, and that might explain why at the time of writing there is no augment available for it, even after all this time.
They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Harrow commands the attention of Oblivion by uttering the soul-shaking incantations reserved only for summoning his gaze, unflinchingly bearing the weight of the void's perception. An oppressive drone spills out from the chains, turning the chamber into a bell, singing in resonance with the iron threads it's bound to. With Harrow acting as the anchor, the weighted pull of the sensor's pendulous motion, the pervasive, skull-numbing drone, and the profuse waves of smoke trailing the sensor's chamber combine into a symphony that is felt in the realm of the unlight, converting the internal chamber into a vessel capable of skimming the gaunt abyss of the void, a well into which its smoldering and vaporescent flesh can flow. As Harrow drives its motion, the writhing vitriol pours into the chasm open to the inner walls of the sensor, wherein it is condensed, refined, and distilled to a pure and volatile wine of potential energy. Once the volume harvested meets Harrow's needs, he takes the sacrament into himself, bestowing Harrow with the blessing of spiritual resurgence and physiological empowerment, both for him and his brethren. For each enemy felled by Harrow, a wealth of energy invigorates him and his team with fuel for their arcane practices. The potency of this benediction is amplified further when Harrow dispatches his enemies with a precision strike to the crown.
Despite the effort I put into that description, THURIBLE is the most straightforward ability in Harrow's kit. You channel the THURIBLE and consume energy to generate the amount you want the ability to return on kill, and anyone in range of the ability's radius will be granted that amount of energy when Harrow gets the final blow on an enemy. The return on energy is multiplied by 4 for headshot kills. The initial cost of activating the ability is not factored into the amount of energy channeled, so consuming a full bar of energy on Harrow will always have the cost of the ability subtracted first. While it's a small detail, it is worth mentioning that all pickups, examples being energy and health orbs, ammo, materials, life support, etc., cannot be received while channeling THURIBLE. And if you have a companion with vacuum or fetch present, these items will cling to Harrow until he is done channeling, at which point all drops will then be registered. Interestingly, the tick rate for THURIBLE, or the amount of times THURIBLE pulls from your energy bar per second, is exclusively tied to casting speed. There are a few important distinctions to make here. Strength does not change the amount of time it takes to consume a full energy pool, because it only increases the amount of energy THURIBLE can generate per point of energy channeled into it. Because of this, no matter how much strength you have, it cannot affect the rate at which that energy is consumed. Having negative efficiency can decrease the amount of time it takes to consume a full bar of energy, but that's only because it makes each tick of energy channeled into THURIBLE consume more points of energy from your pool, rather than it increasing the frequency of ticks THURIBLE can generate per second. That parameter is what casting speed interfaces with. Hi again. I'm not really sure what happened here. I could have sworn I tested this months ago and did not come to this conclusion, but as I'm editing this is incorrect. While it is true that efficiency will impact the amount of energy each individual tick will consume, positive efficiency consuming less per tick, negative consuming more, impacting overall channeling uptime, but both casting speed and efficiency affect the tick rate of THURIBLE. Oddly, if you go with positive efficiency, THURIBLE will tick at a noticeably slower rate. If you run negative efficiency, it will tick faster. This is particularly interesting as slow tick rate on THURIBLE is not what you want, so you're actually incentivized to run with negative efficiency. Casting speed just seems to act as a final multiplier. Somehow, I don't have footage of me doing these tests at a previous date, but I came to this previous conclusion after thorough testing, so it's either different now, an obscure bug, or I'm just fucking insane. Considering how my life has gone the past year, I wouldn't write that off as a possibility. Anyway, apologies for the interruption. Kills from deployable weapons, the wiki mentions the Zenistar specifically, do trigger the energy reward, but kills from more indirect sources like equipped companions are not considered. Enemies killed from dots applied by Harrow will also grant the reward, but dots cannot trigger the 4x headshot bonus, even if that dot is applied on a headshot or kills with a headshot, specifically referring to electricity and gas as they can kill with headshots. So killing with a direct headshot is the only way to get the 4x energy multiplier. Now, the last piece of info worth putting in the summary section would be a warning against accidentally casting THURIBLE again after you've set it to where you'd like it to be. The specific reason for this is once you've cast THURIBLE again, the value you generated last time will be completely wiped, and ultimately it's a massive waste of energy. THURIBLE is easily one of, if not the most potent options for energy regeneration we have in this game. The mere existence of this ability permits a fully ranked blind rage setup on Harrow without him feeling much of anything. His preparation passive ensures you can cast THURIBLE right away without spending any energy pads. And that's the first thing you should do, by the way, because if it's the first thing you cast, you can hit the ground running, with the first kill of the mission potentially giving you a full refund on your energy. That is, if you've elected to consume the entirety of your energy capacity, which is fun, but there isn't actually a practical reason to do so. That more or less covers the front end of it, which is all anyone really needs to know. If that amount of explanation is enough to meet your needs, you can go ahead and skip. But as you've probably come to expect from me, I've looked deeper into the minutiae of how this ability functions, and I will now proceed to go over various points of information that may or may not be as critical, but are still valuable/interesting enough for me to spend the time ruminating over. To start, there is a lot of rounding happening with this ability, since it generates energy points down to the first decimal, or at least that's what it shows us. And the in-game ability details can list the energy conversion percentage down to the second decimal point. Generally, you can just assume that the decimals are there and the math is stacking up, because the energy pool itself is still displayed without decimals. As a quick example, generating 5.3 energy per kill will grant 5 energy for the first 3 kills, then 6 on the 4th kill. This is because the 0.3 decimal adds up like 0.3, 0.6, 0.9, and then it breaches 1.2 on the 4th kill, which would then translate to the 4th kill you've gotten, giving you 6 energy instead of 5. The headshot multiplier with this amount of energy should give 21.2, but it gives 21.1. So it seems to be inconsistent, as sometimes the 4x multiplier comes out accurate on other energy channel tests. Maybe THURIBLE generates up to 2 decimals instead of 1, maybe I'm just stupid, who knows. Is this worth worrying about? No. but at least we know that there's something there. Now for how it scales. The primary driver behind how much energy Harrow can generate for each point of energy THURIBLE consumes is dictated by the stat listed in the ability card, energy conversion, which is determined by using this expression. Be aware, you don't need to memorize this or anything, it's just so you can better understand how it works. Energy per kill equals 1 plus energy channeled times 15% divided by 2 minus ability efficiency times ability strength. We have a few things to expand on here. First, what is the energy conversion value in the first place, and what is it doing? It's pretty straightforward. Assuming we have no strength or efficiency, if you were to channel 100 energy into THURIBLE, you would generate 15 energy per enemy killed, and each point of energy consumed would be worth 0.15 points of energy rewarded. The equation for calculating the energy rewarded on kill functions by dividing the base 15% conversion rate by 2 minus your efficiency, and multiplying that new conversion percentage by the amount of energy channeled, and the product of that is then multiplied by ability strength. After the channeled energy is run through the conversion efficiency function, an additional +1 is put on top of whatever value is generated. This is in place to ensure that casting this ability will always grant you a minimum of 1 energy gained per enemy killed, even if you cancel the ability before Harrow can start swinging the sensor. In this case, you spend the energy to cast the ability, but channel 0 energy, which of course would nullify the entirety of the expression to 0 as well, so having that +1 present before the rest of the equation kicks in is probably there to make sure Harrow can't get stuck with a 0 value for the rest of the ability's duration. It's safe to say that the only real complexities behind this ability stem from the fact that Warframe's energy system does actually factor in decimals, despite DE never making it known to anyone except through this ability's UI, and the details on how the conversion equation is affected by both efficiency and strength, both of which might as well have 0 impact on the player during the mission. The only obscurity that does actually make a meaningful difference is how increasing casting speed affects not only the animation, but also the rate at which you channel energy into the THURIBLE. Considering the absurdity behind other abilities in-game, be it Zada's Whisper, Toxic Lash, Thermal Sunder, or Fangs of Raksh, this one is pretty simple by comparison. So don't let me and my neurotic tendencies to chase down unimportant details deter you from simply using the ability without thinking about it. All you need to do is stay on top of keeping it active and aim for the head, and if you do that, you'll easily generate more energy than you'll know what to do with. Also, one final detail that doesn't really fit in anywhere other than the end of this explanation, THURIBLE works on railjack kills, meaning Harrow is a very capable pilot, and can enable the repeated spam of secret volley, as kills from railjack abilities return energy on kill. If DE conveniently sees fit to change this for reasons relating to unintended behavior soon after the release of this video, after it's been in place for who knows how long, I don't know, crucify me, I guess.
Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. Wait. For the day of the Lord is near. It will come like destruction from the Almighty. See, the day of the Lord is coming. A cruel day with wrath and fierce anger, to make the land desolate and destroy the sinners within it. The stars of heaven and their constellations will not show their light. The rising sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. I will punish the world for its evil, the wicked for their sins. I will put an end to the arrogance of the haughty, and I will humble the pride of the ruthless. Should Harrow seek to call upon the Void to grant him the strength to perform his most sacred blessing, he must first prove his devotion. With the very chains that held him captive, he restrains himself for the Void's view, only to demonstrate the sheer strength of his faith by shattering the links, from which springs his blessing of protection, washing over him and his teammates. With this, all are shielded from affliction, and the outer mind bears witness to this demonstration, accounting for the accumulated harm that would have fallen upon Harrow and his brethren. For it is from this accumulation of prevented injury that will determine the efficacy of the next phase of Harrow's blessing. For the void favors only those with faith strong enough to trust that they will be shielded from the enemy's wrath. Once the walls of protection fall away, Harrow is primed for retaliation. By the void's breath, the ammunition and arms carried by Harrow and his brethren is instilled with volatility and righteousness, sharpened to pierce the wicked souls buried within those who stand against him. In this, all weapons are elevated in their lethality, imparting devastation with increased precision, the degree of which is felt fourfold when a strike meets the head of an enemy.
Covenant allows Harrow to convert incoming damage taken during a buffer period into an absolute critical chance bonus for him and his allies. If your allies are within range, they will also gain the immunity period, and any damage they take will be channeled into Harrow's damage count. Things that interfere with incoming damage, like armor, adaptation, and blocking incoming damage with your melee weapon, do not interfere with the accumulation of this damage. Ensuring everyone in your squad gets the buff can help you gain damage faster, as it functionally multiplies the potential damage you can take by 4, plus whatever companions you and your friends may have active. And we'll talk more about how Covenant benefits companions later on. Once the timer on invincibility is finished, the damage taken is then turned into an absolute critical chance bonus ranging between a minimum of 5% at base strength and 50%. For headshots, these values are multiplied by 4, making them 20% and 200%. If no damage is taken during the protection period, retaliation will grant the minimum crit buff, which again scales from 5% at base strength. The crit buff will be granted to all allies that were within range on the initial cast. Even if they've traveled outside of the range during the duration of the protection period, they will still be granted the full benefit of the crit buff. This ability cannot be recast while it's active and can only be renewed once it expires. Additionally, the animation for the cast is long and a full body animation, so again it's advised you run with casting speed and cast this well in the air, be it during an aim glide or sliding, because it will halt you in place otherwise. You will be invincible, so it's not like you'll get punished if you don't, but it doesn't feel good to lose momentum. In line with the ability itself, we'll start with the protection period. There is something to be said about the value of the invulnerability period when you cast this ability. You'll mostly find it acts as a nice little breather for Harrow and his teammates, which will mainly serve as a good opportunity to refresh the duration on THURIBLE and charge it to a generous amount, max out the duration on PENANCE without fearing the consequences of breaking your shield gate, and max your shields with CONDEMN without enemies wearing them down. All of which can be done within the duration of the protection period. On top of all of this, the primary purpose, of course, is to take damage to charge up the potency of the retaliation buff. If you're decently acquainted with the game, or have been playing for a fair amount of time, you'll probably understand that while you're never really going to complain about a period of invincibility, you're not really going to be using Covenant specifically for the purpose of becoming temporarily immortal. And for like 97% of what the game will throw at you, this will remain true. Most of the time, death is not gonna be what you're worried about. However, there has been one time in particular where this sentiment died away. Of course, it was during a level cap mission with my friends. It was only near the very tail end of the run, like 7,000 to 9,000, I think. I did start to wish I ran with a setup that would have permitted me to make more use of the invincibility periods, because I was running with the Augment at the time, which simply lets you extend the duration of the crit buff by getting headshot kills. To be clear, using protection to face tank common attacks from things like Nox units and their toxin procs, or whatever other bullshit one-shots you a level cap, is arguably impractical. Especially when there are other methods level cap players use to counter issues like this. And to mod Harrow to fit this particular role would take a toll on other abilities, and sacrifice some of their effectiveness. But regardless of practicality, it was a thought that crossed my mind. As time has passed, and as I'm editing this now, I've shifted my thoughts a bit, and I do think it's a decent mechanism to utilize in high-level scenarios, and it can be built and played around without too much compromise on his other abilities, but ultimately this will only really be useful for a fraction of a percentage of players, so for the majority of you, it's not going to be worth worrying about or utilizing as a survival mechanic. While playing this particular mission, a friend of mine was watching us play, and asked me why I was running the Augment, and not running a lower duration and using invulnerability periods more. I countered his question by repeating more or less what I've said already. For the most part, the protection period is less of a survivability method and more of a tool for refreshing abilities safely and getting critical chance. But during those final rounds I had to apologize to him, because I realized why he pointed it out, and he had a point. While I personally don't think it's an entirely justified case to run Harrow with a completely alternative style for the sake of ignoring damage at level cap, it's a feature of his ability, and it's my job to lay them out for you so you can maximize the possibilities. As I briefly alluded to in the summary, companions are a factor to consider with Covenant. In fact, everything Covenant can do for your teammates, it can do for your companions, regardless of whether they belong to you or your allies. So this means all sentinels, robotics, beasts, no matter what type, will also be granted protection, channel the damage they take into Harrow's damage buffer, and receive the absolute critical chance bonus on top of whatever their current modded critical chance is. While we have a good selection of companions and companion weapons to choose from, we generally aren't relying on them to deal lethal upfront damage, and we usually delegate them to roles focused on offering more support or utility. However, it isn't like giving them a critical chance bonus is ever going to be a bad thing. But damage isn't why I'm mentioning this. I'm mentioning this because of Tenacious Bond. With Harrow's very convenient and reliable 50% maximum critical chance bonus, we can not only prove that retaliation applies to companions, but we can also make it usable on any companion or sentinel weapon, because the absolute 50% crit chance bonus is exactly enough to push all companion weapons to meet the conditions of the mod. And with a single mod installation on your companion, Harrow's fourth ability now passively gets an additional critical chance bonus of plus 1.2, which is also applied absolutely. So, unless you're going for something else, there is little reason to not run Tenacious Bond on all companions when using Harrow. Alright, it's math time. I'll try to make it quick, but here's the timestamp to skip if you can't be bothered. At base strength, Harrow has to accumulate 3,000 points of damage to reach the full 50% critical chance boost. In your average star chart mission, that's kind of a lot to ask for, and you might find it somewhat challenging to reach that threshold. With 200% strength, Harrow has to accumulate 1,333.33 repeating points of damage. That's a good bit more attainable, but understand that the easier the missions are, the more strength Harrow will want to reach the maximum crit bonus, since the damage in the early game is comparatively low. It's easy to assume that it'd go to 1,500 points needed, since a doubling in strength would cut the cost in half, but strength not only grants you a greater amount of critical chance per 100 damage taken, it also grants you a larger minimum critical chance floor, which ultimately means the amount of damage required from Harrow decreases on two fronts. Less damage needed to meet the max, and the base crit chance taking a larger percentage of the max value. With a base of 5%, you have 10% of the 50% critical chance in the worst case scenario. With 200% strength giving you 10% as the minimum, you get 20% max crit at the worst case scenario. It's the fact that the critical increase is applied as a flat value on top of a weapon's current modded crit rate that makes Harrow one of the best routes for making a non-crit weapon crit viable. This would not be as true if the bonus granted through retaliation behaved the same as a modded bonus. So as an example, we can imagine Harrow is wielding a weapon that has a 30% crit chance with a point strike. Through Covenant, the weapon will reach 80% crit chance on body shots and 230% on headshots. This means that even if a weapon's stats display a 0% crit chance, Harrow can make it crit. Warframe does have a few other items that provide the same kind of critical bonus Harrow does, just not to the same potency. These items would be Arcane Avenger, which when max gives you a 21% chance to add a flat 45% crit chance whenever you take damage, and the Adarza Kavat's Cat's Eye Precept, which grants a plus 60 crit bonus for 10 seconds every 20 seconds. Like Retaliation, once the conditional is met, you simply gain the percentage labeled on the tin on top of whatever your weapon's current critical chance stat is, no matter what conditionals or galvanized stacks are present. What's more, all absolute bonuses will simply be added together and put on top of any modded crit bonuses. So with Arcane Avenger active and present on Harrow, Retaliation's crit rate will go from 50% and 200% to 95% and 245% on body shots and headshots respectively. The Adarza Kavat's Cat's Eye bonus would simply add another 60% to those values whenever activated. So on the topic of Arcane Avenger, running it with Harrow effectively boosts the crit rate on his ability to max out at 95% on body shots and 245% on headshots. If it were applied before the headshot multiplier, we'd see a much larger value there, but it only adds on top of whatever crit Harrow gets. I do still think it's a good option though, as it can increase the flexibility on what you can push up the crit ranks and help you reach beyond the second and third crit tiers on weapons that already have good crit potential. It can definitely be argued that running Avenger will have some diminishing returns on Harrow, and can potentially harm opportunity cost since there are other powerful arcanes that offer things Harrow doesn't have access to. The crit rates Harrow supplies on his own are more than powerful enough, but I still can't say it's the worst arcane to run on him, which I often do, mainly because it's a lazy choice, and it can help him push some weapons into the third or fourth critical tier if they're already especially powerful. Just keep in mind that something like Arcane Barrier could arguably make more sense since it provides a quality that Harrow can appreciate, and could feasibly reduce the total number of times you would need to cast CONDEMN in a longer mission. One way or another, the augments you put on Harrow are going to be a thing of preference. There are other cases where frames can buff crits. A big one is Frost's Biting Frost augment, which grants him a 200% bonus to crit chance and crit damage on frozen enemies. And I've actually encountered people who have told me that Frost offered a crit bonus that was objectively better than Harrow's, but that isn't directly true. This is born of a misconception and is the result of not fully understanding the differences between additive and absolute bonuses. To illustrate this simply, let's use a weapon with really poor critical chance stats. As an example, we'll use the Rauta, which has a critical chance of 6%. The weakness begins to show in Frost's augment when the weapon Frost uses has intrinsically low critical stats. With Biting Frost and no other crit mods, Frost would only manage to increase the Rauta to 18% crit chance on frozen enemies, which is better, but not really enough to be usable for crit. The reason it's such a poor increase is because Frost's augment provides an additive bonus, which has to work with that low percentage right from the start. And the amount of additive critical chance buffs you would have to stack to make use of a critical chance that low would be very impractical, and likely end up making the weapon perform worse than it would if you just modded for other stats. With Harrow, we can leave the Rauta without any crit chance mods at all, and with Covenant's Retaliation maxed out, the Rauta will receive a massive increase to 56% crit on body shots, and 206% crit on headshots. The reason this is so big is because the absolute bonus looked at the Rauta 6% crit chance and added the plus 50 and plus 200% crit bonus received from body shots and headshots respectively on top of the original 6%. Frost and other frames that provide additive crit bonuses couldn't hope to do anything like that for a weapon like the Rauta. Now what Frost has over Harrow is making use of weapons that already have absurd critical stats and making them crit much harder. There is definitely a tipping point for weapon sets that allow Frost to push some critical guns higher than Harrow could. But ultimately, it comes down to understanding that there isn't one that's better than the other, and it's specifically about understanding the differences between the two and utilizing whatever option suits your tasks better. The rule to go by when measuring Harrow's critical chance increases over a frame like Frost's is Harrow can make weapons that can't crit well, and Frost can make weapons that crit really well and make them crit harder. Also, I do need to give a point to the added critical damage Biting Frost gives, because it's hard not to be a little jealous of that, but at least Harrow can make extended use of Tenacious Bond. I know I have a compulsion to make things sound much more complicated and obtuse than they really need to be, and that is certainly the case for this ability. But all it boils down to is you taking damage and turning it into an opportunistic critical chance increase for you, your friends, and your companions. It's not a trivial amount of crit either, especially if you're in the habit of aiming for headshots. With Covenant, weapons like the Exorgus, or even better the Sporothrix, can be made to crit reliably, and may even warrant you to start making use of additional mod configuration slots exclusively for setups with Harrow. The satisfaction of those dense red crits in tandem with the speed buff from Penance makes Harrow one of my absolute favorite routes to use when looking to put a twist on weapons that don't function like a crit weapon usually would. And the difference is night and day with the right mods and buffs in place. What's even better is weapons that crit really well already feel more powerful with Covenant. Gaining access to crit tiers not previously attainable will very quickly revitalize your love for certain weapons you may have put down or forgotten about, and you might find yourself digging through your arsenal looking for something else you've forgotten about to try with the new power Harrow can give. The primary drawback on Covenant would have to be the limited duration of the Retaliation buff, as it will absolutely leave you wishing it lasted longer. But that's why I personally consider his 4th augment to be an automatic install, since it becomes incredibly easy to keep it active. Even if you don't have it, it can be used for things like Demolists, or just cycled into your already existing rotation of abilities, allowing you to make more use of the invincibility and just have another piece to keep track of. If you really want the augment but you aren't in the right syndicates to get it, the highest price you should pay to trade for one is 15 platinum on the Warframe market site. But what a fantastic ability. Honestly, it doesn't need to be more than this. The potency and punchiness of Covenant ties the final bow on Harrow's kit, finalizing his character and his theme. Through accuracy and pacing, he is the final nail in the coffin. He is the marksman saint that sends your spirit to oblivion, who handles and chambers his weapons with discipline and precision, commanding authority over any soul ignorant enough to challenge him, halting them in place only to look upon them with scorn, and damn them to purgatory with a singular skull-breaching shot. With the abilities covered, we can finally move on to the augments. Luckily, these aren't terribly complicated or involved, and I personally only consider one of them to be worth using, so we can kind of breeze through these without having to worry about too many of the gritty details. Headshot kills increase critical chance bonus duration by 3 seconds. Both the duration added per headshot and the max duration cap scale off of ability duration. It really is as simple as it sounds. I actually can't think of any way to complicate this. Only thing to note is that it has to be a headshot kill, meaning it functions exactly like Deadhead, and kills done by dots even when applied to headshots won't count. The last little detail is if allies are in range of Covenant when it is cast and receive the retaliation buff, any increase you gain to your remaining duration will also apply to the duration of their buff, even if they're outside of the ability range. It's treated exactly the same as yours and increases whenever you get a headshot kill. And that's it. Clean and simple. Best Harrow augment, bar none. Other players will trigger 100% of the effects of Penance and Thurible when attacking chained enemies. Tribunal is CONDEMN's augment and serves as some kind of antidote to the struggle Harrow often faces when running in squads. While I do believe it is a massive disservice to say Harrow is useless in public missions or organized groups, it is irrefutable that Harrow doesn't feel as good in these situations unless he is the most experienced member of the team helping newer individuals, since most of his buffs only activate when Harrow is getting kills or dealing the damage. With Tribunal, Harrow can share the burden of execution with his teammates by allowing them to trigger the effects of his second and third abilities when targeting enemies that have been chained by CONDEMN. After some testing, I think the best way I can describe the effects of this augment would be to say that this only alters the trigger conditions of Harrow's second and third abilities. More specifically, your teammates shooting at chained enemies might as well be the same thing as Harrow shooting at any other enemy. For the augment to function, your teammates must attack enemies bound by CONDEMN and can only trigger the effects of the second and third abilities if they are active, meaning you're still in charge of keeping them active. The lifesteal and energy blessings are still granted through Harrow, meaning everyone must be within range of his abilities to see their benefit. Interestingly, it does not matter where the chained enemy is. A teammate could attack a chained enemy all the way across the map, and Harrow, along with anyone else in his vicinity, would still receive the lifesteal your ally's weapon gained from the chained enemy, as well as the energy increase on kill, which would still be visible to Harrow. All while the individual responsible for killing the bound enemy would receive no form of support from Harrow's abilities, as the second and third abilities themselves still behave as though Harrow got the kill. As for who can trigger the effects of Tribunal, it's not specifically bound to your comrades. Any ally can trigger Tribunal from chained enemies, meaning Spectres, on-call crewmates, liches, any other form of friendly firepower we have available to us. While this is ultimately not useful outside of engineered niche scenarios, I was incredibly pleased to see my Spectre provide healing through damage and grant me an energy boost when they killed an enemy bound by CONDEMN. Since Spectres and the weapons you give them scale with enemy level, and the on-call crewmate has access to your modded weapons, it becomes very exciting to think about just how much you could do with them in a late game level cap situation, and how much stress they could relieve when casting any of Harrow's abilities. Niche or not, I'll be keeping that piece of trivia in my pocket to play with later, and see if some of my other buddies can do anything interesting with it. With all of that said, it's up to you to decide just how impactful this mod is, and whether or not it will be worth using. My default Harrow build already runs the augment for its fourth ability, so there is definitely some mod space for it. Allies in range take 50% less damage while channeling Thurible, and grant 1 additional energy charge whenever damaged. In the interest of saving you some time, I'll just give you the go-ahead to not use this augment, because it's not very good. Yes, both the damage reduction percentage and the energy gained per hit are affected by power strength. The damage reduction reaches a cap of 90%, which is achieved at 180% strength, and yes, Harrow does receive this benefit. The damage reduction does apply to all allied units outside of his teammates, so companion, specters, yada yada, you get it, and even goes as far as to grant defense objects with damage reduction capped at 50%. This additional damage reduction is only granted while you are channeling Thurible. This is an issue because if you are channeling Thurible, you are not doing anything else aside from moving. And even if you have a full energy bar to channel into it, it won't be a long time before you have to put it away. Maybe the thought process behind its design was to provide the player with a better sense of safety while channeling it, but Harrow already has the invincibility period on his fourth ability to make use of, on top of a crazy amount of shield regeneration capability. And if either of those don't cut it, there's nothing wrong with just falling back for a while to catch some breathing room to cast it. The other confusing point is the increase to energy points channeled when you or your allies in range take damage. Thurible is an ability that doesn't need more than like 20 to 40 points of energy channeled to handle the majority of Warframe's energy needs. And this aspect of the augment only seems to massively increase the amount of time you can spend not channeling Thurible, which is counterintuitive because you want to have damage reduction for as long as possible. When you take damage, it only speeds up the rate of energy regen, so you don't need to channel it as much, resulting in less time reducing damage for you and your allies. To say something positive about this augment, it is very funny to get a headshot and restore upwards of 1000 energy. There is no denying that. It's actually comical. But even then, the function and goals of this augment are backwards. It would be much better if they enabled damage reduction to apply to both the channeling phase and the full duration of the ability, and modified or added to the effects triggered from you and your allies taking damage. It's not that I don't enjoy the current effect, because it is very powerful, but on its own it's not enough of a motivator to compel you to charge THURIBLE directly in front of enemies. If some additional parameters that could scale off of the same principle were in place, like temporary health maximum increase or a really powerful, if not generic, additive damage bonus, so long as it was some kind of desirable bonus that would incentivize the player to actually risk their safety in pursuit of another meaningful buff. A change like this would not only give the augment meaning by rewarding a player for channeling it as long as possible in risky situations, but it would bolster and play into Harrow's pre-established playstyle of sacrifice, reward, and discipline, which stem from his biblical theme of a devoted prophet demonstrating his unyielding faith when tested by God, and being granted favor and blessings for his unquestioning devotion. But one way or another, until they do something with this augment, or completely redo it, I advise you don't spend a mod slot on this one. Alright, finally, let's speak on Subusumes. Harrow really doesn't need anything at all to perform. Anything you would subsume is purely to try something new or get access to specific buffs that he doesn't generally get to play with. But the first big question is, what do you even remove off of Harrow? Generally, you're going to remove his third ability. The reason for that is because in modern Warframe, our energy economy solutions are really plentiful. There's many ways you can keep energy up. THURIBLE is still, bar none, the most powerful energy generation solution we have. But you can run Blood for Life, Blood for Energy with Equilibrium, with your Parazon. You could run Death Cube with his energy generation mod. Of course, you could run a little bit of Energizer, have Flow equipped, and you will be fine. The third ability ends up being not needed in that case. There are two others I would suggest lightly, with some decent workarounds. For example, the fourth ability is incredibly important, but in terms of damage buffs, if you're not going a level cap, like, you could try anything else here. Any other damage buff, Zada's Whisper, you could try Roar, of course generic, right? But you could try this in the 4, because as powerful as the crit buff is, if you're already taking a weapon that doesn't necessarily need more crit, I don't see a reason why you wouldn't want to try that. You know, it's up to you. And then lastly, potentially the first ability. Maybe the first ability. But that's largely sticking to this thing right here, my Rock to Dark Dagger, or any other shield regeneration method that you might want to make use of. For one, I just really like the Rock to Dark Dagger, but it does allow me some leeway in getting rid of the first ability. With this, of course, an obvious pick, which we're going to get into here, is SajinKahn-WF's Visibility. I had this on the first ability originally, and it was fine. It did not matter. But yeah, in terms of what you're going to remove, it's going to be the 3, maybe the 4, and if you're really confident with your shields, maybe the 1. In terms of what Subusumes I'm going to recommend to you, I'm going to give you 3. The rest, I want you to figure out for yourself. Of course, first and foremost, we have SajinKahn-WF, right? And you're going to pair this with Arcane Crepuscular, which I have equipped on Harrow right now. Obviously, crit damage buff. If you scale that up with your tier 3 crits, that's going to be a much bigger number. Especially with Tenacious Bond. Tenacious Bond on tier 3 is like already 10x crit or something like that. Obviously, Harrow is built for headshots. Let's get our 4. Get our shields. Let's get some energy here. Cast our 1. Sorry, that was our 2. Prime. Crepuscular. Shreds. Gives us those extra crit damage. Ranks. Boop. It's easy. Headshot. I'm already getting headshots, so you don't need the 1, which is why I removed it initially. But you snare them with your 1. And you can keep your duration up indefinitely. Not even priming them. Super easy. This is Strum Prime. Easy. It's brainless. Stay invisible forever. Serve as the invisible hand of God. Boop. Bow. Splendid. What's another go-to? The one I like to use the most? Zada's Whisper. On the third ability. I took this level cap. It was fine. I didn't really need to use any energy pads. I had my equilibrium. Energy was not a problem. Zada's Whisper does double dips on headshots. It's one of the most potent single target and, precision weapon buffs out there. Of course, we have our crit, which makes it even more disgusting. Let me pick out a decent weapon here. Let me find one what works well for single shot headshots. Let's take the Daikyu as just a fun example. There is one thing I want to mention about this, though. First, let me get my 4 active. This is going to be kind of important. I have Lasting Covenant equipped. If I activate my Lasting Covenant, you'll notice when I get a headshot kill, it does not increase the timer. That's embarrassing. Excuse me. I'm a little tired. With Zada's Whisper, Lasting Covenant does not like to increase the timer. Unless very specific cases, which I'll put a clip in here. If you prime the ever-living shit out of an enemy and kill them with Lasting Covenant, even with Zada's Whisper active, something about priming them, I think it's like getting sufficient damage on the initial hit to kill them. I'm not sure why that would be. With Blast, Zada's Whisper gets a little silly and gets in the way of headshots. But that one gave us increased timer. That one did 2. That one did not. That one did not. That one did not. So it's really weird. It's kind of inconsistent. Why is that happening the way it is? I have no idea. But point is, Zada's Whisper is a disgusting damage buff with the crit especially. I ran it without, I ran it in place of the 4 on occasion, and it was just fine. With the crit, it's even more atrocious. Of course, you got your Blast Acuity setups. Zada's Whisper with Acuities. Fucking abysmal. Not in a bad way. It's too much. But maybe get rid of Lasting Covenant and get used to casting your 4 more often if you're gonna run Zada's Whisper. I like to run this more than the Side 09 because Side 09's invisibility just feels too easy for me. A little bit too brainless. But as for our third one, which I'm going to suggest, it's going to be a little bit out of left field because Zada's Whisper and Side 09's invisibility are obvious choices. As for the third suggestion, Sentient Wrath. I have 2 missing mod slots on this. I'm not going to show you because I have... well, I'll get back to that later. Sentient Wrath provides us with decent crowd control. Now, I was testing with this before Caliban got his rework, and it caused them to ragdoll everywhere. Damage vulnerability is incredibly underutilized, undervalued as well. Let me unpause, get my 4 going. Get our 2. Just for the sake of simplicity, we're going to pause them. Damage vulnerability is an enemy side debuff, right? It's not affecting your weapons, it's affecting the damage the enemies take, so it's multiplicative by nature. Now, beforehand, it would ragdoll them everywhere, but it would still provide us, the damage buff, which was fine. But now, man, even before this solved the problem, we have Condemn. Now, it's not, you don't really need to, right? It lifts them just barely, but we still get the damage buff, and I'll do another side-by-side comparison that's a little bit cleaner to understand and follow. Of course, having my 4 on would make this even more disgusting. But damage vulnerability is incredibly helpful, incredibly useful, especially if you want to go heavy on strength. Let me select a basic rifle here. Doesn't really matter what's on it. We're just going to be comparing some numbers. I'm just going to do some body shots. Okay, 12-12 on a yellow crit. 20 on normal damage. If I lock them down with 1. Yellow damage is lighter. There we go. I got 22-27 on a yellow crit. So it does take, even if they are locked down, and beforehand it locked them down, like, hard on the ground before they could do any ragdolls. Now it lifts them up a little bit. But again, this suggestion came to my mind before the rework was a thing. SajinKahn-WF is incredibly nice. It's kind of whatever. I guess now we have Aurexia's damage vulnerability with Toxin as well, and crowd control, so you could possibly replace this one with that. Ultimately, Harrow does not need a subsum. Not even slightly. But if you are going to use it, you're going to come up with some fun and interesting combinations. It's pretty novel, right? So, there you go. I don't want to spoon feed you subsum options. I don't want to spoon feed you builds. And I guess that's why we talk about where are the builds in my video. You don't get them! Fuck you and your builds. I'm joking. I've worked on this video for about 1.5 years. I am not going to dilute my my video and allow you to skip it by allowing myself to show builds that you could skip to. And I went to the trouble to explain every ability to you in its detail so that you could formulate your own build that you liked that met your specifications. If I was to spoon feed you a build that I would use, for one, you might not like it. But also, I make decisions when making my builds that may not align to yours. Maybe I run more range than you want. Why am I making these decisions? It's better for you to find them yourself. I don't want to rob you of the joy of discovery, which is what Warframe should be about. I've already given you lots of hints on some things that I run generally. And also, like, look at my stats. There you go. Harrow is a balanced frame. He does not need a lot of anything. Bump strength up, like, just strength up a little bit. Keep your range at a medium. Duration, you want duration. What more do you want? But yeah. That should cover it. Now, let's move on to the conclusion. Jeez. So how about it, huh? Worth the wait? Jeez, man. 1.5 years. My apologies for that, everyone. Really, I'm sorry for the wait. I don't have a script. I'd just like to ramble on a little bit with some closing thoughts, some announcements about what's next. First and foremost, I'm going to take a little bit of a break from Warframe. And don't worry, this isn't the like, oh, I'm done, I'm quitting forever. No, I'm not done. But some of you may be surprised to know, I told myself I would not play the Elden Ring DLC or play really any other game seriously until this was finished. And somehow, I've managed to keep that promise to myself. So you can imagine that's taken quite the toll on me. I don't know how I managed to do it, honestly. That took a lot of discipline. Let no one say that I am not a man of my word. So I'll be taking a break from Warframe. I'm going to be playing some other games. Maybe I'll stream. Who knows? But in terms of plans for Warframe videos, I will try and tackle some smaller stuff. Certainly, a retouch on both Baruch and Zephyr are in order. Lots of things have changed since I've released those videos, and I have been asked specifically by a few comments to come back and make a few notes on what might have changed. Personally, I don't think too much has changed, not to the point where it required a huge video to talk about, but it's clear that people want to see more from me, and it's only fair that I learn how to balance some smaller projects like that alongside the bigger ones similar to this that I want to tackle. The next frame I want to talk about in this style is Voruna. Unfortunately, I cannot make a flashy trailer for her like I did for Harrow on the Baruch video, which is a real shame because I actually really liked doing that. I do have some ideas for how I want to go about doing that, like the storyboard, the shots I want to get, the music I want to use. So hopefully it won't be too long before I can put that together. Another thing I really want to do is do something like a director's cut stream, where I'll live stream a pseudo reaction, I suppose. Can you react to your own video? I don't know. But I'd like to stream and watch through my video, and I'll talk about the challenges and the processes I used to make this video. We'll do some reflection on what I could have done better, what I could have done faster, as well as show some of the things I had to cut that couldn't make it in. There's a lot of really great audio clips of me screaming, some really good capture I did not get to use, because let me tell you, I have like way too much footage the folder for this entire project, I'm looking at it right now, is a very healthy 511 gigabytes. It's a lot. There's a lot of footage in there. Point is, I do have plans for the near future. In more immediate news, for anyone watching close to the release date, I am going to be at TennoCon 2025. I imagine only a handful of you are going to get this notification, but if you're also going, I'll make sure I make a post on my YouTube, including some details about how you'll identify me. I suppose I can give you one now. I have a temporary tattoo of my SK logo that I plan to wear, but I'll also leave a few other identifying traits in that post, so if you want to know about that, I guess, subscribe, you know, ring the bell. I hate asking for that, but yeah, I'll be at TennoCon, so if you're also going, come say hi, and I'll give you a sticker if I have any left. In other news, I have begrudgingly opened up a Patreon. I've thought about opening up YouTube memberships and a Patreon, but the main thing that holds me back is that I really do not like the idea of receiving money without giving something in return, and where I am in life right now, I don't know if I can really promise anything in return at the moment, but it's clear that people want to support me. At least a few people have made that known to me somehow, for some reason, but I do now have a Patreon. Also looking into the possibility of opening up YouTube memberships. Similar thing there. I don't know what I would offer you because I just don't want to take your money for no reason. I'm a man of principle. I don't like to receive things for free. I want to offer value. I'm not quite sure what those things are yet, but if the reception is good enough, then we can figure something out. As it is right now, it is purely for financial support. That isn't to say that it can't grow. If this turns out to be lucrative enough for me to give time, I will absolutely look into things like a public Discord server. I will look into ways to give back. And if you happen to subscribe now, you won't need to do anything to qualify to whatever upgrades or happenings go on there later on in the future. Maybe access to behind the scenes stuff, maybe a server based on production and sharing resources with each other. Maybe a cameo spot. You've noticed I've had creator cameos. Speaking of which, here are some credits if they haven't been showing already. And potentially, as a final bonus, maybe even sell a few things. Ideally, this wouldn't be your generic creator merch, a shitty logo printed on a shitty shirt, or a cheap mug. Well, you know, I would be willing to sell some transparent white stickers for my logo. I'd be down for that. I wouldn't want to sell you shit. Sorry, to get to the point, here's some Sajin lore for you. Back in 2016, 2018, when I graduated high school, I did some CNC machining courses. I fell out of it. The job I got wasn't really great. And 2020 happened, kind of fell out of it, right? It happens. The last few months, I've actually gone back. I'm in a different city, different school, but I'm relearning CNC machining, and this time actually getting into the CAD side of things, programming. And that means I can potentially create things that I could sell. Another bit of Sajin lore is I used to have a blacksmithing shop. I still have all my tools, they're down in storage somewhere, but if I can get my life together just enough, while also balancing this as a hobby, perhaps we can talk about selling some blades or other useful goods that can last you a lifetime, because I'm not about selling shit. Ultimately, my channel is alive and well. It will be treated as a hobby unless it can become particularly lucrative, and then I can use it as a springboard to push up anything else I'm trying to do. Maybe even make a second channel, who knows. Things are only starting, you know, it's fresh. Lots of possibilities. But for now, that should cover it. I'm sorry I went on a little bit of a tangent there. There's lots to update you on, lots to say, and this is probably the best place to do it. Of course, this is assuming any of you who have previously known me care to listen this deeply. As a final note, I want to thank each and every creator, friend, companion, anyone and everyone who has interacted with me and stayed close by, even relatively, and encouraged me through this project. Genuinely, I could not have done this without you. As much as I like to shit on the Warframe community, this game has given me a lot. Ever since Gamble, Nova Umbral, Warframe Flow, Kai have promoted my first Little Zephyr video, which feels like forever ago now, and looking back, such a stark difference in production quality. It's kind of insane to think about. Like I said, the credits should be showing, the fashion should be going. Thank you, everyone, so much for waiting and being patient with me. This last year and a half has kicked me to the curb. I've learned a lot of lessons in terms of production. I've learned a lot about myself in terms of how I should make videos and what works for me. By the way, on that note, fuck Premiere Pro on Windows. Pretty sure half the reason this thing is taking so long is because it runs like shit. I have a 3090, I have a 7950X, 64 gigs of RAM, and it runs like complete dog shit. It's half the reason this is taking so long. It's unbearable to work with. And it's a shame too, because it's very capable. It just doesn't run well on Windows. So I will be migrating to DaVinci Resolve. The shorter projects I have in mind will be a nice little learning experience, act as a nice little opportunity to transfer all my Premiere Pro knowledge and adapt it to the workflow of DaVinci Resolve. Still lots to learn on things like After Effects, I don't want to let that go entirely. Point is, I'm okay, I'm well, things are changing, my life is looking like it might be okay. And finally, I can lay the Harrow project to rest. It is completed, it is done. I can't wait to watch over it again in that little producer segment thing, because now that I'm saying that here, I have to do it. That'll be a lot of fun. We can reflect on what can be done better, what I wish I could do, and you can see where I made compromises. It'll be great. So check in for that. With all that being said, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you later. Bye.